Now, the government's expected to publish this long-delayed white paper on levelling up next week. Do you expect it to deliver what you have said that you wanted and help to bring an end to the north-south divide?
Well, thank you for having me on, Trevor. And certainly the government seemed to have acknowledged the issue around levelling up, that we need to rebalance the economy across the UK and ensure that health and wealth and opportunity is shared. And new money is always welcome, but after decades of underfunding, the question will always be, is this going to be enough? Now, of course, we don't have the detail, but it does seem to be a focus on affordable housing, which I'm really pleased to see. As someone who grew up in social housing, I know what a secure tenancy can do to enable you to fulfil your potential. But it has to be about more than that. It has to be about skills. When 50% of the working population don't have digital skills, it has to be about climate change. When businesses are washed away every 2 years by flooding, you can't level up that community. And culture, you shouldn't have to leave your community to go to London to fulfil your dreams. And finally, it has to be about transport and connectivity. I've been on your programme before, Trevor, talking about our disappointment on the integrated rail plan, and now we have a crisis in our bus network. That lack of clarity from government about how much money and if they're going to give any money to the bus companies after March has meant that bus companies are cutting routes in exactly the places that need levelling up, like the 5 towns in Wakefield. So it does feel like every single department has to work together. It cannot just be about one person in cabinet making these decisions. We need everybody to pull together, and unfortunately we haven't seen that from the Treasury as yet.
I want to come back to the issue of buses in a second, but just before we go on to that, indeed, the last time we spoke, it was before the announcement on HS2. And you told me that what you really wanted was a station in Bradford. A few days later, the government announced its plans and there will be no new station in Bradford. There is an issue of trust here, isn't there? Because at that time, I think you had you thought that the government might be on the same page as you. They clearly weren't. What makes you think that you can trust them now?
Well, you're absolutely right. We were poorly served with the integrated rail plan. The 96 billion that government announced, it turns out that 7 billion is for West Yorkshire, 6 billion goes for the Trans-Pennine upgrade, which is the electrification of that line between Manchester and Leeds, which leaves us the grand sum of £1 billion, which is for electrification between Leeds and Bradford, and sadly a survey on how we can get faster trains from Sheffield to Leeds. So disappointing, and when I pressed government to give us the detail of where they were making these decisions, it seems that government and Treasury are just thinking about cost. And this is why I'm saying that people and departments need to work together, because the idea of levelling up wasn't factored in. It wasn't factored in about the opportunity for the people of Bradford to have a new station and what that would impact and the money and investment that would bring. You see that in the Midlands, that just the pure announcement of the new stations and the new rail network, that brings investment. That wasn't in the equation when government were looking at what they would do with the integrated rail plan. So I will continue to press the case, but yes, it was incredibly disappointing.
Let's pick up a couple of the points you've mentioned this morning. First of all, on buses, how serious will it be, do you think, if you don't get the services that I understand some of them that cut in half in some parts of your area? What impact is that going to have, and how serious, how big a deal is it for you?
It's a massive deal. If you live in a community that doesn't have a railway station, you absolutely need the bus network. And that's why when I stood to be the Mayor of West Yorkshire, I stood on a manifesto of improving our bus offer. We've allocated £1 million to investigate public control, because we know that at the moment, a bus network that works for profit, this is where you end up when the government and the bottom line doesn't work and government don't support you, then sadly you're starting to make cuts to that service. So we're getting people approaching us, telling us that if that bus network, if that route ends, they're going to have to walk to work. We heard a couple of months ago of a group of workers who the only way they could get to work economically to make it work, because there was no bus route, was all of them to go in one car and one of their colleagues to travel in the boot. This is not good enough. This is not the West Yorkshire I want to see. We need a proper bus network. And if you're not going to fund us on the trains, please, when we have our bus service improvement plan, I've been saying to government, we need the money. We have a transformational offer for government. You can't then ensure that the money that we are allocating for bus transformation is actually about then managing decline of the bus network.
Crikey, that's a heck of a story about, somebody being in a boot. But do you agree with your Manchester mayoral colleague, Andy Burnham, that key to this is not just the number of services, but their cost? And he's been pressing the case that in London you can essentially have a single bus journey for £1.55, whereas in your part of the country it is far more expensive. Would you put that subsidy for fares as a priority, for example, over fresh services?
Well, I would suggest we shouldn't have to choose. Obviously, London doesn't have to choose whether they get the service or they get the fares. It is part of a complete package. A fare, tap-in, tap-out, capped fare, green buses and routes where you need to get to that serve colleges, workplaces and so on. But of course, it's also about affordability. We have seen the cost of living crisis. Your other guests spoke about that quite eloquently, that the public are going to have less money in their pockets. And if you use the buses on a number of trips, you are paying more, because it's not capped, than those people who just use one bus to get to work and back. So my plan is to cap the fare at £5.50, and we're working with bus companies already. We're not sat on our hands waiting for government. We're already working with bus companies to try and make that happen. It's fair, it's equitable, and it will mean that more people have access to the bus.